thank you to our troops. Everyone, please be seated. At this time, I have the honor of introducing Christopher Bell, who will be your MC for today.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's such a chilly day today, isn't it? Welcome to the 31st anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act commemoration and Wreath-Laying ceremony. My name is Christopher Bell, and I've been very blessed in life to have a lot of hats. Husband, dad, father, lawyer, University of the District of Columbia proud trustee. But the hat that I'm most proud of wearing right now at this moment is as board member for the FDR Memorial Legacy Committee as we celebrate the 31st anniversary of the American Disabilities Act. So many of you might be thinking, why are we here? We could have been at the Capitol or another location, but we wanted to be here at the FDR Memorial because this memorial has become a revered site for disabled Americans. Not just because FDR was the first visibly disabled president, but because disabled Americans have had to fight for representation here. They've had to fight the stigma far too long that has been attached to disability. This memorial is not just a historic landmark. It also symbolizes the fight for equality and freedom that is played out and that is playing out in our country around disabled rights and access. I'm very pleased to be a part of the FDR Memorial Legacy Committee. FDR was our 32nd president, and he inherited the country at a time, or came into office, I should say, at a time when we were in great economic distress. It was still the Great Depression of 1929. FDR became a positive this is society, economic, and civil rights. Even within our category, FDR had a black cabinet as well as black leaders to help to advise on civil rights. So it was through FDR that we see both economically and legal abilities for Americans to participate in our society. And for that reason, I was very pleased and honored when Mary Dolan asked me to be a part of the FDR Memorial Legacy Committee. We're here today to celebrate the Americans with Disabilities Act. And I think a lot of people don't appreciate what the world existed or how it was like before the ADA was enacted. The real name of the ADA Act is an act to establish clear and comprehensive prohibition of discrimination on the basis of disability. Clear, comprehensive prohibition against discrimination. The act was signed into law by George Herbert Walker Bush on July 26, 1990. And what the act does is that it provides employers to provide reasonable accommodations in the job place, but also accessibility requirements in public accommodations. So let's think about that. Before the ADA, there was no laws that protected against disability in the workforce. Employees could be fired. If you needed a ramp, you didn't have the right to have them. Job training programs weren't required. Hotel accommodations weren't required to have places or abilities for disabled individuals to be able to have access. But with the ADA, that changed. The Americans with Disabilities Act includes both mental and physical medical conditions. It doesn't need to be severe or permanent to qualify as a disability. Deafness, blindness, intellectual disability, autism, cerebral palsy, diabetes, HIV, multiple sclerosis, the list goes on. Individuals that had these particular issues were not always able to access the benefits of our society. But as of 1990, the ADA provided a path, a vehicle, if you will, to promote a more inclusionary society. So with the ADA, discrimination in employment began to be addressed. Discrimination in public entities, schools, school districts, city and county government buildings, public transportation, housing, public accommodations, all those were able to be addressed. Issues of discrimination with respect to disability access because of the Americans with Disabilities Act. The main sponsor in the Senate was our Honorable Senator Tom Parkin. He authored what was to become the final bill. And when the bill was signed into law by George Herbert Walker Bush, the last sentence of his signing statement said, "Let the shameful wall of exclusion finally come tumbling down." Ladies and gentlemen, the ADA is here for all of us. It helps us to perfect that more perfect union so that all members of our society can participate in the benefits that our society has to offer. So thank you very much for being here today as we celebrate this wonderful historic act on this 31st anniversary. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to yield the floor to my colleague, the one and only Mary Dolan. I joke because Mary Dolan was my wife's friend, so I say I inherited Mary Dolan through marriage. But I think she's become my friend. Ladies and gentlemen, the Executive Director and Co-Founder of the FDR Memorial Legacy Committee, Ms. Mary Dolan.
I think I have to just lower this just a wee bit. There's a little difference. There we go. Well, thank you all for being here today, and thank you, Chris, and thank you all for agreeing. Thank you, Chris, for agreeing to be Master of Ceremonies today. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Senator Duckworth, Congresswoman Holmes Norton, Peter Kovler, Director Kim Hall, Serena Jaros, RJ. Thank you all who came out and are also watching us virtually, Facebook Live. Today is truly a dream come true. 2 years ago, Jane DeLand, Jim Dixon, and I formed the FDR Memorial Legacy Committee so that disability history of the FDR Memorial would be remembered. We soon expanded our mission to serve in full support for the entire memorial as we saw the need for a citizen-led organization to partner with the National Park Service to educate, improve accessibility, and improve other services and preserve this great memorial. But this dream did not just start 2 years ago. It is the fulfillment of a campaign started in 1995 by Alan Reich and Mike DeLand and Jim Dixon. And their campaign was to remove the stigma of disability. I had the good fortune of working with them during that time and in that campaign, which culminated in 2001 with the dedication of the FDR wheelchair statue in the prologue room just behind us. But times have changed since 2001. New memorials have been built, new faces are in politics, new generations of Americans claiming their rightful space. But one thing hasn't changed. This memorial is the site where an epic battle for disability representation played out. This is where our disability community heroes, Yoshiko Dart, Justin Dart, Evan Kemp, Nick County, Dr. Eiking Jordan, and so many others, and so many of you who are out there right now, where you all spoke truth to power and simply said, do not hide disability. And now we are gathered here to honor the anniversary of the ADA and to honor those who fought for that law, who fought for truth at this memorial, and who continue to struggle for equality today and for the rightful place of disabled people in the American narrative. I want to thank Chris Bell for your friendship and your leadership, which brought the FDR committee into partnership with the University of the District of Columbia. I am proud to report that just last week, the first ever teacher development workshop on the FDR Memorial was held. Woo! We trained educators on how to use this memorial and its disability legacy in the classroom. And we could not have done it without UDC, our own public university here in DC, our hometown, and particularly could not have gotten it done without a wonderful young professor over here, Professor Arlene King-Berry. Give it up, Professor King-Berry. I don't know what I would do without you. Holy cow. Thank you, Senator Duckworth and Congresswoman Holmes Norton, for being with us today. Your offices have always had time to talk with me about the memorial. And I know that you have a few other things going on. But your staff always takes my call. And I know it's really easy to say, yeah, there's not enough time, there's not enough resources, but you understand what this memorial means to the disability community and to our nation. So thank you. I want to thank Peter Kovler for being here today. You have been a sounding board for me, and a cheerleader, and a generous supporter. The other day, you said that when you got started with your work that on FDR, in your humble way, you said something like, well, what did I know? I was just being a smart aleck. Well, God bless the smart alecks. Because without your vision, none of this would be here today. So I look forward to continuing to be a smart aleck with you into the future. Thank you to Kim Hall from the National Park Service for joining us. We look forward to continuing to work with the Park Service on education, preservation of the memorial, and working together to make this memorial the best in class in accessibility. Wouldn't that be great? A salute to our funders who have joined us in this mission, especially those who have made this event possible today. The Gordon and Laura Gunn Foundation, who breathed life into this organization, the Blum Kovler Foundation, and our good friends at the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation. Thank you to all of our funders who are proudly listed on our website. And I want to thank two very important advisory committee members who are not here today, unfortunately, but are here in spirit, Jim Dixon and Jane DeLand. Jim Dixon led the grassroots campaign that resulted in the FDR wheelchair statue, and Jane DeLand, wife of Mike DeLand, who led the overall fight. Both of them helped create this organization, tireless leaders, and dear friends. And thank you, FDR Committee Advisory Board, who came on out. Give yourselves a, Come over there. And the award for longest travel to an FDR Committee board member to get here today goes to Stephen Graham, a member of our FDR Memorial Advisory Board. Stephen, son of Robert Graham, who created not only the FDR wheelchair statue, but many other pieces of art in this memorial and around the country. Stephen's counsel and support has meant a great deal to me personally and to the organization. I'm almost done. Special thanks to the FDR Committee staff, especially Kelly Douglas and Laura O'Connell. Thank you for all you do. And to all the volunteers who came out today, thank you. And for those who were trying not to give a parking pass to Senator Duckworth, we'll talk about that later. Everybody else got a parking pass except for Senator Duckworth. All right. And a quick shout out to a local homegrown organization, Green Scheme, for keeping us hydrated. They donated the water, and we look forward to doing some work with them in the future. And I gotta say thanks to Cheryl Henderson, who is a mainstay in interpretation and making access available to our community. So thank you, Cheryl. And as I turn the mic back over to Chris Bell, I want to end with a phrase that my old bosses, Alan Rank and Mike DeLand, would say to each other at the end of each conversation to keep each other motivated, especially during those years working to secure that wheelchair statue. And so I say it to each and every one of you, onwards and upwards. Thank you.
We are celebrating the 31st anniversary of the American with Disabilities Act. We would like to have done the 30th anniversary, but because of COVID and the agencies around COVID, we weren't able to do it last year. But we're doing it this year. As you know, the COVID pandemic hit the world hard. Among the hardest hit have been disabled people, young and old, and especially those who are black and brown. Systematic inequities have exacerbated and resulted in death. A field of operatives, activists, and advocates have worked tirelessly to stem the tide of this dire loss of life. A lot of good has been done. I have the honor of recognizing one community activist and disability leader who has helped lead the COVID-19 coordinating efforts in both Montgomery County and Prince George's County, Serena Jaros. You know, Mary was mentioning the American narrative, and Serena is helping to contribute to the American narrative. She has been rising through the ranks of disability community leadership with her selection of the highly competitive American Association of People with Disabilities internship. She has worked at the DC Center for Independent Living as an outreach coordinator. and most recently as COVID-19 coordinator at Independence Now, an independent living center serving Princess George and Montgomery County. Ladies and gentlemen, Serena.
Hi. Thank you so much for that introduction. Like you said, my name is Serena. I am a COVID services coordinator, so I have, obviously seen a little bit on the front lines what this has done to our community. And I just want to say a few words. First, to reiterate, thank you for joining us here at the FDR Memorial on the 31st anniversary of the ADA. This anniversary comes at a time of incredible loss for the disability community. The COVID-19 pandemic disproportionately affected people with disabilities, particularly Black and brown folks, as well as those living in congregate settings. This pandemic exacerbated the existing barriers facing disabled people. Folks had to navigate a lack of PPE, a lack of care attendance, and much more with little guidance or support. And the past year in particularly laid bare the vulnerability of these systems that are not protecting us, and as Chris mentioned, particularly those of color, and how unprepared we remain to address their needs during a national emergency. And this pandemic reminds us that we have far to go to fulfill the promise of the ADA. And also at the site of the Franklin Delano Roosevelt Memorial, a president with polio, Roosevelt created many programs to provide a fair chance for the middle and working classes. And it's in this spirit that the work of ensuring a robust and equitable ADA continues with the next generation of disability activists. As someone who didn't grow up in a pre-ADA world, I don't take for granted the tireless work of those early advocates who opened the doors to accessibility. I have been so blessed for the opportunities. And also we continue to better understand the complexity of the barriers people face and the significant overlay of ableism, racism, and the continued forced poverty of people with disabilities. But also, let's learn by this experience and today celebrate our commitment to making inclusion and full accessibility a reality. And I just want to lead us in a minute of silence for those we lost.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure now to introduce Kim Hall from the National Park Service. Kim is a 34-year veteran of the National Park Service, and earlier this year she was selected as the National Capital Area Director. The National Capital Area Director is responsible for 16 superintendents who manage hundreds of park areas in the District of Columbia, Maryland, Virginia, and West Virginia. She joined the National Capital Area after serving for 6 years as the superintendent at the Colonial National Historic Park and Captain John Smith Chesapeake National Historic Trail. Ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to present Director Holmes.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Very much a pleasure to be here. On behalf of the National Park Service, the Director, and the employees here in Washington, and at the other 422 national parks across this country, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the Franklin Delano Roosevelt Memorial. And don't tell the other memorials, but this one's my favorite. I would certainly like to recognize Senator Tammy Duckworth and Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton, who are joining us here today, and who we'll have the pleasure of hearing from a little later. So despite the postponement of last year's observance, I'm so pleased that we are able to be here in person on this 31st anniversary of the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act. On this day especially, I'd like to acknowledge the contributions of those who championed the creation of the prologue room, This prologue room actually didn't exist the last time I worked in DC, so it's been lovely to be able to take a look at that this morning. Dedicated 20 years ago this past January, including those who are here with us today that helped to make it a reality. You have helped to ensure, in the words of President Bill Clinton, that generations of Americans will know that this great president was great with his disability. On July 26, 1990, President H.W. Bush signed the ADA, landmark legislation that transformed American society and enabled a generation of Americans with disabilities to thrive. You could have just signed it in March. That would have been a lot more helpful. A little warm in July. The National Park Service is committing to ensuring that people with disabilities have the opportunity to benefit from and enjoy our facilities, programs, services, and activities. At the same time, we recognize that many barriers to equal opportunity and accessibility remain. We recommit to our work of making the promise of the ADA a reality, enabling all Americans with disabilities to enjoy their national parks. As I mentioned, as I'm returning to DC after many years away, I have the opportunity to review our national memorials and monuments with fresh eyes. I've been eager not only to revisit these sites and stories they represent, but to assess our efforts to create a welcoming and universally accessible experience for all visitors. I'd like to highlight some of those recent and ongoing work that our staff has been engaged in. Here at the National Mall, we've secured more than $20 million for recent accessibility projects, and that work includes such things as major street intersection and crosswalk improvements that are nearly complete, the creation of new accessible ramps at the Thomas Jefferson Memorial to provide visitors with an accessible, direct route to the chamber of the memorial, and that work will be starting this fall. Renovation of elevators, which in some cases provide the only accessible access to the historic monuments and memorials at the National Mall and new further. Introduction of accessible outdoor exhibits at the new Dwight D. Eisenhower Memorial, and over time the replacement of all of the park's 1,000 benches with a new accessible design. So here specifically at the FDR Memorial, while the most obvious work has been the complete rebuild of the original pump systems and the restoration of the water features that are so integral to the experience of this memorial, we also initiated a lighting and relamping project. The memorial is stunning after dark and attracts visitors long into the night. But the sprawling memorial has 30 pole lights, each supporting anywhere from 2 to 8 fixtures, which are difficult to change and create safety and accessibility concerns when they burn out. We recently upgraded all pole lighting, much of the accent lighting, to high efficiency and more reliable LED lights. We've completed several reconstruction projects to address ground subsidence, which created uneven surfaces along the trails and memorials, and that continues to be an ongoing challenge for us here on the mall. We complete several, while these upgrades were in the works long before COVID, the pandemic did delay our progress, but it also allowed us to expand our use of digital technologies, which is kind of a new format for us. An audio-described version of the FDR Memorial brochure is now available on our website and through the Unit Description app. Additionally, a comprehensive audio-described tour of the memorial is available on the nps.gov website. There's still more to be done as we prepare for the 25th anniversary of the memorial's dedication in May of 2022. We will continue to improve the lighting at the memorial, and we're reaching out to lighting experts to identify a solution for our remaining issues, including failing mounts for many of the 100 ground lights, damaged by age and foot traffic, and maturing trees and plants that have rendered lighting ineffective in some areas. We intend to work with the Commission of Fine Arts on several elements of the memorial that are part of the integral design but actually present accessibility challenges. We will remodel the interior exhibit space in the visitor contact station and create tactile displays of the memorial and the sculptures of Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt. Additionally, we will add tactile wayfinding exhibits, reconfigure the glass braille exhibit, and redo the exhibits to prevent information by multiple modes, including text, graphic, and audio. And as I mentioned earlier, on a more personal note, President Roosevelt has always been a tremendous inspiration to me, a tremendous leader through some of our country's most difficult times, a president president who invested in the people of this country when they needed it the most, and a man who did not let his physical limitations define him or hold him back. I will save my admiration for Eleanor for another speech. With that, I am mindful of President Roosevelt's advice to be sincere, be brief, and be seated, and will therefore bring my remarks to a close. But I'd first like to thank the FDR Memorial Legacy Committee for organizing today's observation. Thank you so much. And we appreciate your commitment to the FDR Memorial and your continued support of accessibility issues. One of Roosevelt's ambitions as president was to construct a more inclusive society, which I think we can all appreciate, and to make a country in which no one is left out. Your work here brings us a step closer to realizing that goal, and we are grateful for the opportunity to work with you on such a worthy endeavor. Thank you all so very much. Have a lovely afternoon.
Thank you, Director Hall, for those inspiring words. You know, nearly 3 million people a year visit this memorial. They learn about a president who saved the nation from the Great Depression and led a world war against fascism and tried to promote a more inclusive and diverse society. It takes a lot to make a memorial happen. Congress appropriates monies, citizens donate, architects design, and builders build. But none of this happens without the drive to make it happen. And that drive comes from someone, the instigator. Ladies and gentlemen, Peter Kobler is such an instigator. It's my pleasure to introduce him. Without him, and without his enthusiasm for FDR and Eleanor, without his enthusiasm for FDR and Eleanor Roosevelt, the incomparable Eleanor Roosevelt, I should say, and their messages and relevance for future generations, this memorial would not be here. And without his openness, belief in equality, and allyship with the disability community, the prologue room and the FDR wheelchair statue would not be here either. I've learned that Peter is not just about memorials. Among many accomplishments, he, along with his wife Judy, and his foundation established the Marjorie Kobler Center for Treatment of Survivors of Torture and were major donors for the frontline workers for COVID-19. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my proud honor to introduce Mr. Peter Kobler.
If the planes are bothering you, take that as a signal from FDR himself, because FDR created National Airport, and the fact that all the memorials are so close to National Airport, you can attribute to FDR. It wasn't anybody else. Coming to an event like this, I prepared things, but so many rush of memories came to me. Even though I tell myself, I once spent a lot of time with old timers, and they had too many rushes and too many memories. And if you talk too much about the way things once were, you're going to lose the audience, as was just said, the FDR phrase. Be brief, be sincere, be seated. I guarantee you I will be sincere and I will be seated. Very quickly, I'll keep it to 4 rushes of memories. Seeing Steve reminds me so much of his beloved father who created the sculpture. You can have all the great concepts in the world. You can want fairness. You can want something represented. You can scream and holler and petition and lobby. But if you don't have a brilliant sculptor who can turn those ideas into a physical construction, you're really not going in the right direction. And it was his dad and Larry Halpern, the architect. Again, you can beg, plead, whatever you want to do. This is not fair. If you don't have someone who's visually brilliant, can understand how to match the prologue room with the rest of the memorial, you're going to do more damage than you are going to be constructive. So hats off to the Graham family and Larry Halpern. And I can't help but mention, I'll go on too long, but on the night of the opening of the memorial, Larry said, "You're so crazy about this. You're out here all the time. Here's a gift for you." And the architect, Larry Halpern, gave me a sleeping bag. to make sure that at nighttime when I was out here, I'd have a safe place to be. Second memory that comes to mind is with Eleanor. Eleanor and I first came to know each other a very long time ago, but I think the main person who may have introduced us was Joseph Rao. That may not mean anything to you all, but he was a great civil rights lawyer through the 30s through the 80s and 90s. And Joe, Eleanor may not know this, Joe spoke in front of a congressional committee begging for this memorial to be built. And he said to my old boss, who was the chairman of the committee, Sid Yates, a line that I don't think has ever been repeated at any other congressional hearing. And he said, Sid, we got to get this built before we all croak. Who could forget a guy making an appeal to a member of Congress because he was afraid they would all pass away before the creation. And being here with Senator Duckworth reminds me of so many of the wonderful senators, the workhorse senators, not really the show horse senators, who did so much to make this memorial happen. I think of Carl Levin in Michigan. It was his idea, as many of you may know, to have a sculpture of Fala in the third room. Who ever heard of a dog in a presidential memorial? But that was Senator Levin's idea, and quietly, Senator Inouye, Senator Hatfield of Oregon, and so many others made this happen. And it was really the workhorse senators didn't seek any attention for it. The fourth I want to remind you of, and now I'm going on too long, I'm not brief, is the work of what Alan Reich and Mike DeLand did. And when I first met these two guys, I thought they're so courageous. They get around so easily with their disabilities. And yet, then we had endless lunches. And I said, these guys are crazy. They think they're going to take on the federal government of the United States and rebuild a memorial. And it took years and years, but my goodness gracious, they did it. And with the help of the visual and people like Robert, they pulled this off. And I believe this sculpture is as enduring as any sculpture in Washington. And as the director says, this is my favorite memorial. I want to add, I think, can't be documented, I think I've been out here more than any other person. That's a hell of a thing to say, but it can't be documented. But I've been out here on the night of 9/11 when everything in Washington was closed down except for fighter jets over the city. I've been out here constantly. It's a personal pilgrimage spot for me because if something goes wrong, I think of Franklin Roosevelt and Eleanor Roosevelt. And I think for others too, you said 3 million visitors now. I'm not alone, and I'm not an iconoclast. Last point that I want to introduce Congresswoman Holmes Norton, and I want to introduce Senator Duckworth. There are 3 words in this memorial I don't think I've seen in any other memorial, and which should apply to the disability community and others. Fear, connected to Franklin Roosevelt's first inaugural, don't need to be repeated. Strength and courage. Eleanor's words in trying to describe what polio did to her husband. And I think if the wonderful thing about memorials is some people are visual and take away a memory of what something looks like, or some people take away a memory of just the park experience, but other people take words away. Words, a lot of people put a lot of time and attention into getting the right words. But I think if I could simplify this, bumper sticker, make it a meme, or whatever, I would say this memorial speaks to strength, courage, and how to deal with fear. And any part of that could be your takeaway. I think the memorial succeeds. Now, the real job I've got. Sorry if I was not brief. I'd like to say a few words about my hometown member of Congress, Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton. Not only my hometown, but now the hometown of my sons here in Washington, and grandsons. Like the Eleanor of this memorial, maybe your parents may have but I don't know. Eleanor is a 4th generation Washingtonian and a lifelong fighter for equality. She's a graduate of Dunbar High School here in Washington, and may have been, I have read in the last, correct me, may have been in the last segregated class from that era, where people with Eleanor's pigment were called colored. While in college, she was active in the civil rights movement, and then went down to Mississippi as an organizer for SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. If you're more interested in that subject, by chance today's New York Times has on the front page the obituary of a wonderful man named Bob Moses, who was also Mississippi with Fannie Lou Hamer and Medgar Evers. She is also an attorney, was the first female named chair of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. She then earned her law degree and a master's degree at the same time from Yale University. In 1990, she was elected a member of Congress from Washington. She has been a leading voice for equality for D.C. through advocating for statehood, and has been a fighter for economic development here as well. No need to believe me. Get on YouTube, watch what she did on the Stephen Colbert show last week. It was last week. It's the top of the YouTube video with Eleanor's name identified with it. And she unfurls an amazing new American flag with 51 stars. I tried to say to Eleanor, how do I get this? Eleanor has been a tireless advocate for the disability community, including but not limited to her March 2021 introduction on the House floor of a resolution. This is important because we've got to go forward as well as all this excessive looking back. The resolution was called for recommitting the United States to the promotion of disability rights and to the values enshrined in the prologue room of the Franklin Delano Roosevelt Memorial in the District of Columbia, and recognizing the enduring contributions that individuals with disabilities have made throughout the history of the United States and the role of the disability community in the ongoing struggle, think forward, for civil rights in the United States and for other purposes. The Congresswoman who did teach law full-time before being elected at Georgetown, where my son, a public defender, went to law school, teaches an upper-class seminar there every year. Please welcome Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Senator Duckworth, honored guests whom you've heard from, and especially those of you who come out this afternoon. I am surely honored to be here for the very first wreath-laying at the Franklin Delano Roosevelt Memorial in honor of the 31st anniversary of the American with Disabilities Act. And you may have just seen President Biden celebrate this anniversary at the White House, which was almost simultaneous with this ceremony as well, although I don't think that's how it was planned necessarily. I want to thank the FDR Memorial Legacy Committee for the invitation to speak alongside Senator Tammy Duckworth. I'm a strong supporter of the committee's work to preserve the memory of Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt and to celebrate the disability community's contributions to this memorial. Advocates of people with disabilities contributed to the deep authenticity to the FDR Memorial by ensuring that the memorial depicted President Roosevelt in a wheelchair. Troubled that the original plan for the memorial did not openly display President Roosevelt's disability, advocates campaigned for representation. As a result of their leadership, President Clinton directed Congress to pass legislation requiring a statute depicting Roosevelt in a wheelchair be added. For much of our nation's history, a person like President Roosevelt, who could not walk unaided, had few civil rights related to their disability. In the 1980s, disability advocates organized a coalition of supporters to agitate lawmakers to craft civil rights legislation on behalf of people with disabilities, banning discrimination against millions of people and requiring reasonable accommodation in schools, on transportation, and in other areas of public life. The American with Disabilities Act has shaped modern life for people with disabilities in the 31 years since it passed. In Congress, the fight for disability inclusivity continues. I am proud to have introduced a resolution with Senator Duckworth this year, which commemorates the 20th anniversary of the wheelchair statue addition to the memorial, motivated by the belief that our parks and memorials should be accessible regardless of disability. We called on the National Park Service and the National Park Foundation to make improvements to the memorial's accessibility that disabled visitors had suggested. Our resolution also directs NPS and NPF to develop accessible educational materials about the history of the memorial and the disability rights movement to ensure this important history is never erased. To fulfill the promise of the FDR, equal access for the disabled, we must remain dedicated to protecting and advancing the civil rights of people with disabilities. On this anniversary, Robert Graham's optimistic bronze statue of President Roosevelt, which portrays him seated on a wheelchair of Roosevelt's own design, reminds us that there are no heights Americans with disabilities cannot reach. I am thrilled to mark today's occasion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eleanor. I'm very much a point you need to make. I now have the distinction to also introduce another great American. 31 years ago, former President George H.W. Bush signed the Americans with Disability Act and declared, "Let the shameful wall of exclusion come down." There is no one in America today who is taking down those shameful walls more than United States Senator Tammy. Senator Duckworth, before I forget, I had a chance this weekend to read her memoir, and I cannot recommend a book more highly. She has written a beautiful description of her life, and a beautiful cover photo as well. And a nice shout out to an Illinois school named Northern Illinois University. Senator Duckworth was among the first handful of Army women to fly combat. During Operation Iraqi Freedom. Can you all hear me? No. I know. Can you all hear me with my? Yes. Crossed her right leg near the hip and her left leg below the knee. Injuries sustained. The Black Hawk helicopter she was co-piloting was hit by a rocket-propelled grenade fired resolution, Congresswoman Norton of Norton introduced in the House. Recommitting the United States to the promotion of disability rights. She, along with Congresswoman Holmes Norton, has called out the need for improved access to this memorial. Senator Duckworth has said, the ADA is the living testament to our nation's commitment. We will always stand up for our neighbors' rights to live fulfilling lives. That sounds very FDR. And we are honored, and Eleanor, and TR. And we are honored you are here to help us celebrate the ADA and help move our nation forward in standing up for our neighbors' rights to live fulfilling lives. Distinguished guests, Senator Tammy.
Hi everyone, good morning, or afternoon I guess. It's great to be here. Well, I'm just thrilled that you're having me here today, and I can't tell you how honored I am to not only be here, but to be speaking before this specific group of people. Congresswoman Holmes Norton, I had a pleasure of serving with her in the House for 2 terms, and she is a real fighter. And I've seen some sparks in the House where she gave back as much as she took, and it was really a good lesson in leadership to watch her. Peter, of course, all the work that you've done to support this memorial, thank you. You know, this is a group that knows we can never ever accept the status quo until it accepts all of us. No matter the color of our skin, who we love, whether we walked or wheeled ourselves here today, or whether we read the words in this memorial by sight or by touch. To me, the activism surrounding this statue with all of us who are here today encapsulates both how far we've come as a country, but also how far we still have to go. In 2001, the hard work, long days, and even longer nights of a handful of incredible activists paid off, and our nation's 32nd president was finally portrayed as he lived, as a man who uses a wheelchair. It might sound small to some, it might sound insignificant to others, but to countless people across this nation, it was as if a veil had been lifted. For so many, this statue sent a message that in the long arc of America's history, having a disability was no longer something that needed to be shrouded. It was no longer something that had to be relegated to the shadows, no longer something to hide. In fact, as I tell a lot of people who say to me, oh, she's not confined to a wheelchair, I tell her I am way faster in a wheelchair than I ever was on my 2 legs. And I can knock down a lot more things. And also that I earned this wheelchair. This wheelchair for me is a badge of honor. So, you know, it's no longer something to hide. And suddenly, because of this memorial, having a disability was something to take pride in, something to take courage from, something to memorialize, to celebrate. Because what those activists knew was that Franklin Delano Roosevelt didn't change the world in spite of his disability. He had the grit, the bravery, the determination to do so, at least in part because of his disability. As Eleanor Roosevelt once said, and as has been memorialized here, Franklin's illness gave him strength he had not had before. He had to think out the fundamentals of living and learn the greatest of all lessons, infinite patience and never-ending persistence. These lessons were internalized by the activists who made this statue a reality. They took the baton from the very man that they were seeking to honor, witnessing discrimination, yet refusing to let that deter them, instead channeling their frustration into motivation. Now, that baton has been passed to the next generation, because the fight isn't over yet. For a while we've come closer to having the true representation for our community at this memorial, we will never truly reach that milestone until every American can access and enjoy it, including those who are blind or visually impaired, who right now are unable to read the illegible braille on the walls behind us. It is no longer past time. It is long past time that this memorial lives up to President Roosevelt's words that are inscribed upon it, that we must scrupulously guard the civil rights and civil liberties of all citizens, whatever their background. We must remember, he said, that any oppression, any injustice, any hatred is a wedge designed to attack our civilization. Of course, President Roosevelt's unjust internment of Japanese Americans reminds us that living up to our values is an enduring challenge, even among our heroes. And more importantly, it serves as a stark reminder that the hard work of forming a more perfect union never ends. So before I go on, I just want to take a moment to thank those of you who are here, who are still working tirelessly to ensure that someday soon, these Braille renderings will be accessible to the very individuals they are intended to serve. Thank you for refusing to give up, for refusing to settle, for pushing for a future in which a child with low vision will be able to put her hands on these walls and learn about the person who proved that Americans with disabilities can be anything they want to be, even President of the United States. Of course, we're also here today to mark the courage of all those who transformed the ADA into law. 31 years ago, 1,000 activists gathered close to this very spot, demanding that Congress finally give Americans with disabilities the basic rights that the Constitution promised. Dozens of those activists got up out of their wheelchairs, set down their crutches, and 1 inch at a time crawled up the 83 steps of the Capitol building. Jennifer Keelan, an 8-year-old with cerebral palsy, pulled herself to the top of the steps, telling those around her, quote, "You don't have to help me. I'll take all night if I have to." It's thanks to the strength of people like Jennifer that the logjam in Congress was broken, and that 4 months later, the ADA was enshrined into law, helping Americans with disabilities lead the full lives that we deserve. And it is thanks to the sheer willpower shown by those activists that day that I can now roll through the Capitol building's corridors to cast my votes in the Senate chamber. You know, my entry into the disability community was a world away from most people's. I'd never really been sick before. The Army had me in the best shape of my life. Then one day, in one moment, I went from the height of physical ability to a person facing a disability. But looking back, I think I truly was one of the lucky ones. Because not only did I earn my disability at a time when the ADA was already law, but I also had the benefit of recovering at Walter Reed Army Hospital. The doctors there did tell me that my life as I knew it was over. No one said you can't, no one said you won't. For the moment my eyes were opened, I was told that I could still do A, B, and C, and that one day soon I would again be able to do X, Y, and Z. And then they challenged me to do things I'd never even done before, like marathons. And I told them they were out of their minds. But you know, that's far from the typical experience. Too many Americans with disabilities get ground down by society. They're told no over and over again. So while I feel lucky to have been supported, pushed and prodded, even to, yes, eventually do a marathon, I also feel like being supported should not be the exception. It should be the expectation for all Americans. Our society should look at folks with disabilities and not see what they can't do, but instead see what we can make happen, whatever we want to make happen. But to do that, we as a nation must change our mindset. We have to relearn how we think about disability issues. Because while we've come a long way since the ink dried on the ADA 31 years ago, everyone here today knows how far we still have to go over the next 31 years to make this country actually, truly, and fully accessible. Look, it's 2021. Our community is already 61 million strong, a number that will only grow as more and more baby boomers become disabled and face a disability due to their increasing age. We should still face a reality where some Americans can't work or get to work, can't go to school or to the grocery store. A reality where the unemployment rate for folks with disabilities is more than twice the rate of those without. We shouldn't have to keep pouring so much energy into just defending our most basic rights. We should still be fending off legislation attempting to gut the ADA. And you know what? I am sick and tired of playing defense day after day. I like offense. So let's decide to take inspiration from many of you. And I've decided that I am going on the offense as well. That's why I am reintroducing a bill that would incentivize businesses to actually make their facilities accessible. A policy that helped both our community and the economy by expanding businesses' customer pools to those of us with disabilities, because guess what? We have spending power too. It's why I'm reintroducing another bill that would make exercise and fitness equipment accessible to all in all of our gyms. And after having several of my own wheelchairs, and several is an understatement, several of my own wheelchairs damaged during flights, It's why I wrote and passed policy that requires airlines to report how many chairs they damage every month, forcing them to treat our assistive medical devices as what they are, complex medical devices, not just suitcases to be tossed around. Of course, there's still even more to be done, and luckily there's a generation of young folks ready to take the baton, folks like Serena, who's here today. But that is just a start. Now there's at least some consequences for those who treat us with disabilities as if we are of no consequences. Because the truth is, every American is just one bad day, one medical diagnosis away from becoming a disabled person, and everyone should hope to live enough that they eventually gain some sort of disability and become differently abled. And our laws should reflect that. They should safeguard every American's constitutionally enshrined rights rather than punishing the very people whom our country has already discriminated against for too long. They should ensure that all of us are able to enjoy national parks like this one, and that once here, all of us are able to actually read about and honor the president who proved that having a disability doesn't mean you can't change the world forever and for the better. So our laws guarantee all that. This community has got to do what we do best. Come together, speak out, make sure that those of us lucky enough to be your representatives actually represent your needs. After all, it is that kind of work, that kind of courage that made this statue a reality in the first place. And I hope that you know that all along the way, I'm going to be right there by your side, striving to bring about a tomorrow where we won't have to work so hard just to live our daily lives. And if you need me, I will use my wheelchair as that battering ram to knock things down. So thank you to all of you. I know the wheelchair users here know what I'm talking about. So thank you again for all that you're doing with our community, and I'm honored to be your partner in this fight on the front lines. So here's to 31 years of the ADA, and here's to accomplishing even more over the next 31. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Senator Duckworth and Congresswoman Holmes Norton, for your leadership. You know, Peter referred to you all as workhorses, and I think that is so accurate because you both understand service. You, with your work in trying to make the District of Columbia the next state, and you, with the many efforts that you've done to promote civil rights among all Americans. It's just fantastic. You understand service, and you work hard to implement it. So thank you very much for your inspiration. Peter, thank you for the work that you've done with the FDR Memorial. You're helping to let others learn about his legacy of both FDR and Eleanor Roosevelt, and we appreciate all the work that you've done. Thank you. All right, we've had great speakers today, ladies and gentlemen, but we have one more important task to do before we close our event, and that is the placement of the wreath. This is our first ever wreath placement at the FDR Memorial. We do this to honor and to celebrate the ADA, and to also recognize the disability leaders, past and present, who have fought tirelessly for the ADA and still fight every day for equality for all people. We thank you. We honor you. You have made a difference, and we will keep on fighting. At this time, I would like to ask Stephen Graham to come forward as we process to the statue of FDR in a wheelchair, which was designed and created by his father, Robert Graham, to place the commemorative wreath. We ask that all guests to stay seated at this time. You will be invited row by row to place your flowers. Thank you once again for joining us today on this very special day. We appreciate you being here. Thanks again.